Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton and welcome to this Photoshop and Elements video lesson from Digital Photo, the UK's best-selling photography and imaging magazine. So far, in this special guide to improving your landscape images, we've seen how to fix bad lighting, improve on empty skies, and save flat and dull images with a timeless mono conversion. All of these different methods can save a landscape shot from the bin, but what if you've tried them all and you're still not getting the results you're after? Well, how about going a bit arty? In this example image, we've taken a fairly flat and uninspiring starting point, then recomposed it a little bit using the crop tool, applied a classy split toning effect using a gradient map, and finally added this captivating blurry vignette. All of these different effects combine to give the shot a more antique and slightly ethereal look, almost like a picture from a pinhole camera. And overall, we've created an image with a lot more impact than our starting point. Normally, this kind of darkening and loss of sharpness at the frame edges is something that photographers try to avoid. But in this case, we're going to use it to our advantage, really drawing attention to the subject in the middle and ending up with a lovely finished image. Okay, let's see how it's done, and I'll first just close down our example picture there. And then if you want to follow along with me, just make sure that you've got tree.jpg loaded up from this month's CD. Right, so the first thing we want to do is recompose our image a little bit just by cropping off some of this dead space around the bottom and the right hand side here, and we're going to do that using the crop tool. So just come over to your toolbox and give that a click. And then, because we want our post-crop image to be the same size as our starting image, next to where it says aspect ratio up here in the options bar, give that downward facing arrow a click and pick Use Photo Ratio. And then we'll just click on the image and drag out our cropping marquee. Now something around about there should be okay. We've got our tree sort of nicely in the middle, and the horizon there is just a little bit lower than the center of the box. In fact though, I am going to modify it just a little bit just by clicking on this bottom right corner handle here and dragging the marquee upwards and to the left. Then we'll just reposition it ever so slightly, and yeah, that's looking okay for our purposes, I think. So we'll just click the tick down here at the bottom of the marquee to finalize those changes, and very quickly there's our cropped version. Now if you do think you've made a mistake with your crop, maybe you've lopped off a little bit too much, just press Ctrl and Z on the keyboard and that'll take you back to your starting point. The longhand route for that is just up here under the Edit menu. There you can see the undo option. Now it's greyed out because we've gone back to our open state of the image, and I'm just going to hit Redo Crop to take us back to our cropped version. Now, as you'll have seen in the previous video lessons, something that can really improve your landscapes and give them more impact is turning them black and white. In this case, we're going to do something similar, actually creating a slightly toned version using two different shades, one for the highlights and one for the shadows. That's called a split toning effect, and it can look really arty on your pictures. Now that might sound a little bit complex, but it's actually very quick and easy to do, and the results are well worth it. I'm going to show you how it's done using an adjustment layer in the Layers palette. So bring your Layers palette up on screen, and if you can't see it, just come up to Window and down to Layers. And once we've got our Layers palette open, we want to click on this half black and half white icon, the Create Adjustment Layer icon. Click and hold your mouse button down on that and pick Gradient Map from the list. Once you do that, the image will start to look very strange indeed. And in all likelihood, it won't look like the one that I've got on screen here. That's because my gradient information is being taken from the foreground and background colors there in the toolbox. And yours will very likely be different. But not to worry, we'll soon sort that out and create a really nice split-toned effect. Now within this first dialog box that comes up, we just want to make sure that Preview is ticked, and that just means we can see any changes that we're making on the live image there. And then to really start making some changes, just click on the gradient. That'll bring up the Gradient Editor dialog box. There are a number of presets loaded in here which give us some really rather weird and wonderful looking effects. But we don't want to just use what Elements is serving up for us, so we'll start by just clicking on the foreground to background option there, and then also make sure that next to gradient type we've got solid selected rather than noise. And then we can decide the actual colours that make up our gradient. To do that, just double click on the colour stop handle there at the bottom left, and that'll bring up yet another dialog box, this time where we're going to pick the actual colour. This first choice is for the darker tones in our image, the shadows, and what I want to do for this picture is give them a nice cool blue colour. So to do that, I'm first just going to click and drag these arrows up the colour bar here until they're in the blue section. Somewhere about there should be okay. And then within the colour picker itself, just going to click and drag around until we get a nice, cool, pleasing blue. And I've actually got some RGB values that I used on my example image, so just clicking here within the box, I'm going to set red to 11, green to 32, and blue to 143. Once you're happy with the blue shade for the shadows, just click OK. And then we can do exactly the same with the bottom right hand colour stop. Just double click on that, and then we'll be able to select a nice warm tone for the highlights. So again, we'll just click these arrows and move them this time I think up into this orangey section, and then somewhere around the top here we'll find a nice warm colour. Once again, I've got some RGB values to use, so I've got 255 for red, 187 for green, and 132 for blue. And just as before, we'll simply click OK to exit that box. And now, just by looking at our preview here, we can see that we've got these nice blue colours in the shadows, everywhere the image is dark, and in the highlights, it's much warmer. We've got this nice kind of light orange. It's looking a little bit gaudy at the moment though, but don't worry, we'll fix that just by pressing OK to exit our gradient editor, and then OK once more to exit the gradient map dialog box. And to bring through some of those darker tones from the original image, I'm then just going to click on the background layer, come up to Enhance, down to Adjust Colour, and pick Remove Colour. That'll turn our original image black and white. And then, clicking back on our gradient map adjustment layer, just click up here where it says Normal at the top of the layers palette, and we're going to change that blending mode to Multiply. And there, immediately, we get this much nicer and more intense effect. Now that's starting to look really good, but if you do want to make any changes to the colours you've used, just double click on the gradient map adjustment layer icon there, click on the gradient once more, and you'll be able to change any of the settings that you put in. For instance, we may just want to make our warm highlights a little lighter, just dragging that over to the left a little bit. That looks pretty good. Click OK to exit again. And then we can also change the position of the colours, the mix of the colours, just by clicking and dragging on the colour midpoint slider. So if we drag it to the left, we're introducing more of the warmer colour into those shadows, and if we do it the other way, our highlights get a little bit bluer. So once again, just click and drag that around until you're happy with the mix. Something around about in the middle though should be fine for this picture, so I'm going to click OK to exit those palettes again. And now we can get on with making our dark, brooding and blurry vignette. So come over to the toolbox, click on the rectangular marquee tool, hold the mouse button down and select the elliptical marquee tool. That'll be hiding underneath there. And then we'll just click on the image somewhere about there and drag it out so it kind of covers the middle of the tree. Something around about there should be okay. We don't want it going too close to the edges of the frame. And once you've released the mouse button, if you want to reposition your marquee, just click within the marching ants and drag it around. But as I said, something about there should be okay. And next we just want to soften the edge of our selection so we get a nice kind of gradual blend between those areas that we're darkening and those that we're leaving alone. So come up to Select, down to Refine Edge, and then we'll set the smoothness down at 0 and the feather radius will push all the way up to the maximum of 250 pixels. Click OK to exit the Refine Edge dialog box. And if you're using an older version of Photoshop or Elements, you won't have the Refine Edge command, so just go back up to the Select menu again and choose Feather. OK, so now we've softened our selection. We want to invert it so it's covering the edges of the frame, not the center as it is at the moment. So we'll come up to Select again and down to Inverse. There we can see the position of the marching ants changes. And now, to add our darkened vignette, we'll come over to the Create Adjustment Layer icon again in the Layers palette, give that a click and select Levels. That'll bring up the Levels dialog box, and in here we're going to click and drag the middle slider over to about 0.55. That'll darken down the edges of the frame really nicely, as you can see, and we're really starting to get that intense vignetting effect that we're after. You can also just click and drag in the black point slider a little, just to make sure that we've got some true black around the bottom of the frame there. But once you've done that, just click OK. Now, what you might notice after you've made your levels adjustment there is that we're getting a slight colour shift around the edges of the frame. This is because our adjustment layer is darkening all of the layers below it, including that gradient map. So to correct this, just click on the layer itself and drag it down between your background layer and the gradient map. Once I release the mouse button, you'll see that we get a much smoother effect because we're only darkening the pixels below our adjustment layer. Right, so now our vignette effect is looking really good. It's time to add the blurriness around the edges of the picture. We can do this using the same selection we just made for our vignette. So just come up to Select and down to Reselect, and those marching ants will all reappear. Next up, we want to click back on our background layer to select that in the Layers palette, and then just press the Control key, hold that down, and then hit J. And if I just expand my Layers palette a little bit there, you'll see that it's copied all of those selected pixels onto Layer 1. And now, with that layer still selected, we can come up to Filter, down to Blur, and pick Gaussian Blur. And then just keep your eye on our main image there as I click and drag the radius slider up to about 20. And you can see those edges of the picture just softening and diffusing, and that's giving us our really nice pinhole camera look. Once you're happy with the amount of blur, click OK. And that's our arty landscape image almost completed. The final thing I'm going to do is just do a little bit of dodging on our background layer just to lighten up some of the highlights there and give us a bit more contrast. So click on that in the Layers palette there, the background layer. Then over in the toolbox, we'll select the Dodge tool. Make sure you're using a large soft edge brush, that the range is set to highlights and the exposure is down at about 3%. And then I'm just going to click and rub the Dodge tool over the parts of the image that I want to lighten, just those in the center here. And by doing this, we're just kind of improving the lighting and adding to the overall sort of drama of the scene. Just kind of making the difference between the light and the shade in the image all that much more intense. Okay, so the final thing to do is just to come up to Layer and down to Flatten Image. And there's our finished arty landscape for us to enjoy. We've ended up with this really intense and dramatic image that's a million miles away from our flat and dull starting point. So if you've got a landscape image of this kind that you want to improve, just make sure you give it a go. Okay, hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time.